Greetings, Culture Warriors. It is Jeff Vieira, author of Culture is Everything, and your host for this latest dispatch from the front. Got another story for you today that we will be unpacking and analyzing through the lens of company culture and values. So let's take a look at our story today. This is from the Associated Press. Danica Cotto. Puerto Rico to demand COVID-19 test results from passengers. Puerto Rico's governor on Tuesday announced strict new rules for all passengers flying to Puerto Rico in a bid to curb coronavirus cases as officials blame recent outbreaks on those who flew to the U.S. territory and were infected. Starting July 15th, all passengers have to wear a mask and must take a molecular test 72 hours prior to their arrival and submit the results to officials at the airport. Those who refuse to do so, or tested positive, or do not have the test results available, will be forced into a 2-week quarantine. During that time, they have to undergo a molecular test and share the results if they want to be released from quarantine, said Puerto Rico Health Secretary Lorenzo Gonzalez. If you don't want to be tested, stay home. Don't come here and complicate our situation, he said. Most molecular tests involve a nose or throat swab and are used to diagnose an active infection. Puerto Rico's government will not accept any other test, including antibody ones that require a finger stick or blood drawn. The island of 3.2 million people is emerging from a lockdown that began in mid-March. The government has reported at least 153 deaths, along with more than 1,690 confirmed cases, and more than 5,770 probable ones. Gonzalez acknowledged that the government will not track every single violator ordered into quarantine. Instead, the monitoring via a system known as SARA Alert will be random and target those who do not respond to tracking efforts, including phone calls and personal visits. Passengers who do not respond to text messages requesting health updates will be fined. Governor Wanda Vazquez said her administration will recruit 350 people to help with tracking and monitoring efforts. We cannot let our guard down, especially with people who live elsewhere and are infected, she said. The new rules come amid an alarming resurgence of cases in the U.S. mainland, with states like Texas, Florida, and California backtracking on reopenings. Meanwhile, worldwide, officials report 500,000 confirmed deaths and 10 million confirmed cases. Several weeks ago, Vasquez asked the Federal Aviation Administration to temporarily ban commercial flights from cities in the U.S. mainland that are considered coronavirus hotspots. The FAA did not respond to that request. Puerto Rico expects to receive up to 9,000 passengers a day in upcoming months, compared with the roughly 4,500 daily current arrivals, said Carla Campos, executive director of Puerto Rico's tourism company. Vasquez's administration will require that all passengers fill a form prior to arriving in Puerto Rico with required information, including where the test was taken. Vasquez also stressed that everyone has to wear a mask if they're going outside or going into a business. Puerto Rico's main international airport will continue to be the only one accepting all commercial flights, with no date yet on when other airports, including a smaller international one in the island's northwest region, will reopen. Currently, passengers can voluntarily undergo a test at the Luis Munoz Marin Airport. More than 280,000 people have been tested, with more than 660 positive results, said General Jose Burgos, commissioner of the island's Emergency Management Bureau. All right, so let's unpack this a little bit. For anyone not up on their U.S. geography, Puerto Rico is a territory of the United States, but not a state. And so there's some important distinctions there. Basically, what it comes down to is that while Puerto Rico is a lot like the rest of the U.S., it retains a measure of autonomy in setting its own policies that is not really enjoyed by the other states of the United States. So Puerto Rico has quite a bit of leeway in establishing these kind of rules, right? So let's take a look at that. You got 3.2 million people on the island, and it's probably more than that, given tourists travel at any given point at this point in the year. But we say we got 153 deaths. So if there's 153 deaths out of 3.2 million people, times 100, and that gives you a 0.005% chance of dying of coronavirus this year if you happen to be in Puerto Rico. So that's a lot smaller than a lot of places, right? Let's take a look at the case rate here. So the case rate is, 1690 confirmed, 5770 probable. Let's just add those together for the sake of argument. And divide by that 3.2 million. Oops. It helps if I do my math correctly. I'm assuming that the confirmed are not a subset of the probable. So we got 7460 total cases divided by 3.2 million times 100 will give you 0.23%. So an infection rate of about 0.23%. So given those numbers, well, let me ask you this question. Why, especially given the fact that almost all of these are skewed towards people over the age of 70, why, in terms of the deaths, I'm sorry, why is Puerto Rico locking down its economy? Puerto Rico relies, it's not a very wealthy state. If it were admitted to the United States, I believe it would be the poorest state. Why is Puerto Rico foregoing the tourist dollars it depends on, given those numbers are so low? It doesn't make a lot of sense until you consider what we were talking about last podcast with regard to America's ruling class, the politicians and the media, who are at war with the American people, particularly the middle class. And it's largely the middle class, if not the lower class, who benefit from the tourism industry in Puerto Rico. So all those business owners, all those people working at the resorts, etc. So why would we pauperize those people on the basis of these numbers? And why would we go to the extent of treating visitors so poorly, especially that most of those visitors are Americans, your countrymen? So the notion that you're going to treat them as though they're criminals because they're coming to take a vacation in your territory is a little bit odd. I love the loaded language here, if you want to be released from quarantine, as though being in quarantine is now the normal condition for Americans. You should be under house arrest. It's a special privilege to be released from quarantine. Oh, nonsense. Nonsense. If you don't want to be tested, stay home. Don't come here and complicate our situation. Complicate your situation? You're not seeing pandemic levels of this virus on your island. Based on the death counts, it's particularly mild. So I'm not sure, beyond the need for some people, such as, say, your governor, or perhaps your Emergency Management Bureau Commissioner, General Jose Burgos, Governor Wanda Vasquez, perhaps they have a problem. In fact, we saw a little hint of this in a prior disaster, actually, where there was problems with Puerto Rico's ruling class politicians making false claims about the distribution of disaster supplies, most of which sat in warehouses and were never distributed to the people of Puerto Rico. So there's a major disaster response. Lots of supplies donated and purchased. And then Puerto Rico's wonderful ruling class junta completely fell down on the job of getting it in the hands of their people, what they didn't steal, and blame the federal government for it. I suppose that's another advantage of being a territory. Dependency without any accountability. So what would you say Puerto Rico values here? Well, for their ruling class, they clearly value control. Control above all else. I can bet that what's running in the back of their minds is, oh no, you're not going to get me on this one. I was criticized last time. I'm not going to be criticized this time. We're keeping it locked down. Right? You can almost hear the discussions, right? And then what they will undoubtedly do, as states will be doing, is they'll be going to the federal government for a bailout at the economic damage caused by their lockdown. It's rather like being a heroin addict and getting the government to pay for your heroin fix. Only here, the heroin is power. But what goes unsaid here, because you'll notice they didn't quote anyone. What about the people of Puerto Rico? We don't hear from them. Clearly, this Danica Cotto hung around the governor's mansion and asked people who were available. And that's all she asked. But people on the street, how do they feel about this? Are they relieved because they're afraid of catching the virus? Are they upset because of the loss of jobs and income? We don't hear from them. They're the silent people in all this. And yet I would argue that in the American system, whether it's a territory or a state, it is the concerns of the people that we should be most interested in. Because we elect our representatives in the United States of America. They're called representatives because it is our interests, the interests of the American people, whether as a whole for the federal government or whether in part at the state and local level. It is our interests which are supposed to be forwarded here, and yet in this article you will see nothing, not one word about the interests of the people of Puerto Rico. The closest we come is Carla Campos, who directs Puerto Rico's tourism company. And she was allowed, not a quote, but simply to provide numbers on how many people are coming in. It's an odd story when you get right down to it, right? So many unanswered questions. What we also don't hear from is, how about people who are vacationing in Puerto Rico? What do they think of this? Being treated as though they were Typhoid Mary. Are they making other plans? I know what I would do. I would say, I'm never going to that island again. No way. That's what I would say. But that's because I value my freedom and I value being treated with dignity and respect when I'm traveling somewhere. So it'd be interesting to see how this continues to pan out. You have a weird period right now where two contradictory states of reality are obtaining in different parts of this country based on the political affiliation of the governor of those states. In one part, it is pandemic, outbreak, lockdown city. And it's becoming increasingly totalitarian. We're going to track people's movements. We're going to show up where they're at and demand their test results. Something that's illegal, by the way. Under our laws, HIPAA, you cannot be forced to give up any medical information. But that's all been ignored along with the Constitution. So you have those states, and then you have states where it's pretty much business as usual. I went to Mount Rushmore several weeks ago with my family. It was wonderful. No masks, voluntary social distancing. The governor stated that we trust people to look out for their best interests. Right? So if you don't want to get coronavirus, there are things you can do to prevent getting coronavirus. Keep your distance from people and wash your hands. Pretty simple, right? So those two states cannot simultaneously remain true. Either a number of states and territories are treating their citizens as though they were prisoners and slaves of the government because there is this deadly pandemic ravaging the countryside, or you've got a couple of tin pot dictators for psychological and political advantage who are abusing their power and their authority to the great harm of the people they are alleged to represent. One of those two things must be true. They cannot both be. And I suspect we will see before July is out which is which. I would keep an eye on moving goalposts with regard to reopening America. They've already moved a bunch, especially in some of these states. Keep an eye on them to move more, because you'll notice how it's shifted from death rates now to cases, as though the lethality of this disease had increased rather than diminished. I should say reported lethality. The actual lethality is the same. It's just taken a while for testing to reveal how high the incidence rate really was. But there will be a reckoning for all of this, my friends. You can see. What I would like to see is that this continued practice in the media of silencing the ordinary person in the street cease immediately. They're currently being protected by the ruling class. Indeed, the media role was deemed essential in this crisis. Essential. They were essential workers. Their credibility is gone, at least in this country. So we'll see how long that situation is maintained as well. With regard to the people of Puerto Rico, I hope that sanity will be restored. I hope that your governor and whatever general cronies she's got are sent packing. And I hope that your beautiful island can once again soon welcome with open arms the people who want to explore it and experience it, and in the process contribute to your livelihoods. May that happen sooner rather than later, my friends. Have a great day.